We start with the chapter number 2 of Samkhya Yoga, verse number 7 onwards till verse number 13. Interestingly, the delusion and dichotomy-ridden Arjuna has now arrived at a state of bewilderment where he is making a pronouncement of wisdom as a wise individual. Whereas on the contrary to his own words, his conduct, the way he is conducting himself, is absolutely averse to his words. His charioteer, the divine intuitive intelligence by the name Krishna, amidst 7 and 13 verse, shall now directly intervene and take the course of the journey of Bhagwad Gita to a larger dimension. So far, what we have observed is the dichotomy of Arjuna right amidst the battlefield, where in an ignited form he started and initiated to contest in the battle, whereas soon as he arrived amidst the battlefield, he fell prey to his own propensities. The bias withheld deep within him has held him to charter further. As I've mentioned it earlier at a number of occasions, that this is an allegory, a metaphor, a simile. Bhagwad Gita is a personification of the characters in order to express the subtler dimensions that transpire within a human being. Here, in verse number 7, Arjuna now reveals candidly before the intuitive input of intelligence, the divine intelligence, Krishna, that I lack the appropriate requisite will. I'm absolutely torn. He's in a very pitiable and a pathetic position. He's not able to garner adequate energy, will, in order to charge his major pursuit. Courageously, he started, but right amidst, he has left the wage, the war he had waged against his own propensities. Now here Arjuna once again makes a mention that since I lack that requisite determined will, I declare my unpreparedness to fight any further. And thereafter, he deboards the chariot and relinquishes his Gandev by making a declaration of not fighting. But there is something very interesting and surprising and most important to mention over here, that while Arjuna has declared and admitted candidly that he is devoid of the requisite true will necessary to combat his own inner propensities, at the same time, he has produced himself in all forms and manners, in complete and absolute terms, before his master, the grace of his master. He is now seeking asylum of his master, and at the same time, he is making a petition, a yearning before him, asking him to intervene, handle him, help him. Now, what does it mean? It's a mention of a gospel in disguise, that whenever any seeker shall seek the invocation of true determined will, it shall not happen unless one is submitted in absolute terms before his or her own objectives. Submission and immersion into one's own core objective is the prerequisite for any true will to dawn. If any seeker wants to manifest the true will in his resolve, in order to enable that, he or she must submit one's own entirety before the objective. In other words, submit one's own self as an oblation in the service of one's own objective. And so does Arjuna in the verse number 7 by submitting himself before the Almighty Divine Keshava. We go on to the verse number 8 where it makes a mention, the divine intuitive input, it makes a mention to any dichotomy or delusion ridden Arjuna, be it you or me or anyone else. It candidly expresses that beware, however affluent you may be, however strength you may be, but in case if you're not in a position to be victorious within your own self, if you do not behold control within, if you're lost your inner battle, then be it known to you in all times and in all terms that any amount of affluence to your account shall accrue no peace or joy. You shall always remain unworthy, devoid of the inner stability and inner victory. One who is always in control of one's own inner self is the true victorious one. And let it be known, Arjuna, you may behold the rightful ownership to the kingmanship or royal castles, royal rights. Let all the rights and noble aspects bestowed upon you shall never assure that you shall be able to enjoy the inner peace and joy that shall always become your domain when you are in absolute control within yourself. So this particular verse number 8 is a clear mention that one who is victorious within shall only acquire the right to enjoy the external material aspects of the life. In verse number 9, the intermediary Sanjay now takes the charge of the pronouncement while making a mention that the master, the mentor Krishna now addresses Arjuna once again as a Gudakesh and a Parantapa. Gudakesh means one who shall never sleep. In other terms, it's an allegory utilized in order to mention about the ever vigilant state of a human being. One who is constant, equitable vigilance. One who can observe the state of constant, equitable vigilance at all times, in all terms, all through the life. The another term which has been ascribed to Arjuna is Parantapa, the slayer of the foes. Now here, sagaciously, the mentor has ascribed once again a new address. Or rather, I should say, he's reiterating his address to the dichotomy-ridden and bewildered Arjuna. On contrary to the actual state and situation of Arjuna, who is bedimmed, who is discouraged, disengaged from the battle, in order to encourage him, retain his actual true stature, his mentor is mentioning once again Gudakesh, Parantapa, reminding him of his true potentiality born within, something which probably is not able to gather, understand or relate with. There are times when under the spell of bewilderment, we lose all count and awareness of all those virtues beheld within. Therefore, Master sagaciously making use of the opportunity not only wants to educate, instruct, inspire and motivate his subject Arjuna, but at the same time, he is also reprimanding him in a very delicate manner. Here, his mentor is observing him. In verse number 10, his mentor, now observing his bewildered, aggrieved subject, disciple, the warrior, the formidable one, Arjuna, now ridicules in a manner that while observing him, he passes on towards him a very cynical smile. Generally, if you observe in your day-to-day life, there are occasions when we recall the virtue or a stature of a human being and we find him quite worthy enough, potent enough, able enough, yet not being able to charter in order to achieve the required objectives of life. When we find such a subject where he is equipped and encompassed with all that he must have, and yet not able to charter and charge upon the situation, we ridicule that subject. We smile, we laugh at him, because we are somewhere, we're not able to understand, we're not able to absorb the kind of state which that subject has fallen into, because there is no substantive reason for which we can attribute his inaction, his inactivity. His state of bewilderment, when cannot be related with anything which is substantive, then leads the one who is making an assessment just merely to ridicule and laugh. And it is the same which is happening in the verse number 10. Standing right amidst the battlefield, observing the Arjuna in the state of bewilderment, the divine intuitive input here smiles onto him. What makes you so unworthy, Arjuna? You, the beholder of the power, you, the slayer of the foes, you, the one who is born with constant equitable intelligence, you, ever a vigilant one, you are demonstrating as an inactive neutrality leading nowhere. He laughs at him. Verse number 11 onward now starts the national highway where the vehicle of Bhagwad Gita now embarks upon the main course. Now it is the pronouncement and a propagation of the basic ethos and gospels of the ancient Indian wisdom. Something which must be reiterated time and again, that 11th verse onward is a point where it's a mention into the spiritual parlance. It's an indication for the Arjuna, the one who is bewildered, because now it's a moment for educating and shifting the attention, awareness of the delusion-ridden Arjuna to a higher dimension. There are different ways to educate. When we talk about paradigm shift, what is paradigm shift? A paradigm shift is a total shift in one's own perception. At the perceptory ends, shifting the awareness from one dimension to another dimension. And Krishna now since wants an elevation of a mean, of a narrower, of a lower dimension in light of Arjuna and elevate him to a higher dimension. In fact, he wants to observe Arjuna undergoing a paradigm shift. In order to establish a paradigm shift, Keshav is making use of an excellent pattern wherein he is now enabling Arjuna conceive and traverse into a higher dimension of consciousness. Rather, he is now making him aware about the law of causation, taking him beyond his situation which prevails at that particular moment. Because the momentary spell cast on the mind of the Arjuna has disengaged him from all necessary obligation which should be dispensed by him. Instead, he has now bewildered himself. Now the disengagement shall only happen through a paradigm shift, and a paradigm shift can only happen when the awareness can be shifted to a higher dimension. In order to dispense with the paradigm shift, Keshav now produces before the Arjuna a wonderful observation. He makes a mention, you speak like a worthy man, but you conduct as an unworthy one. Your words are of a worthy human being, wisdom born, whereas your conduct is absolutely contrary and unworthy. Why are you prevailing in a split personality, Arjuna? You should not be like that. On one hand, you talk about submission. On one hand, you really understand your inner situation. Whereas on the other hand, when it comes to act, you act absolutely averse and unworthy of your own observation and your words. Why is it so? Since you are already grieving of something which has passed away or something living, this entire creation is transitory. For the creation that is transitory, the one which is past and one that is present is about to pass. For the transitionary phase where this entire existential being is now existing, why grieve of it? Gatasoon agatasoon is a reference that has been attributed to the transitionary phase of this entire creation. Why should you grieve for that? As a wise man, you should comprehend the situation at a larger dimension and rise above. Station yourself atop the situation and see the time moving in eternity. Why don't you observe the ongoing affairs in a timeless situation? And here he makes an unfoldment. He makes an unfoldment in an excellent manner, that do not grieve for something which is part of the transitionary process of the law of causation in this cosmic creation. Verse number 12 is a major point where the ethos of the ancient Indian wisdom now unleashes. It's a major point, a major verse where the basic ethos of the ancient Indian wisdom unleashes. Here, it is an important aspect to be understood. The chapter goes by the name Samkhya Yoga. Samkhya means the most appropriate firm knowledge, the most appropriate knowledge of the creativity, the creation. Now, Samkhya is a philosophy propounded by Kapil seer, a seer who was known by the name of Kapila. Whereas, now the same philosophy, the same doctrine of Samkhya has now been brought here in Bhagwad Gita with certain amendments and additions. In other words, Samkhya Darshan, the Samkhya philosophy, here comes as transformed as Samkhya Yoga. Yoga means an enjoyment of any ethos or learning or an act or a belief or a state with a higher dimension of consciousness. An enjoyment of the Samkhya knowledge, the Samkhya philosophy with a higher dimension of consciousness becomes termed as Samkhya Yoga. Now, how does Samkhya philosophy not transform as a Samkhya Yoga? In fact, Kapil Rishi, the Muni Kapil, the great sage who propounded the Samkhya Yoga, makes a mention that the entire creation, the entire creativity is an outcome of two major forces, namely the Purusha and the Prakriti. Purusha is all human beings, the conscious beings, and Prakriti is the nature. The mingling of both then leads to the manifestation of the entire world as we see it, the apparent world. Here, in the verse number 12, there is an intervention of a third component, a third ingredient, a third incumbent. And the intervention of the third incumbent is Keshava, the Almighty. Remember, when Kapil propounded Samkhya Darshan, he merely made a mention to Purusha and Prakriti, the conscious being and the nature, the matter. Whereas here the Muni Ved Vyas has further improved, added, amended the Samkhya Darshan by adding the invocation or the advent of Krishna. Krishna means symbolic representation of the cosmic creator, the one who is almighty, divine, the super boss, the unified field, from where all comes. So here it lands into, the duality lands into Trinity. Earlier it was a mention to duality, the Purusha and the Prakriti, the conscious being and the nature. Now it has further into a Trinity. What is Trinity? Keshava, Arjuna. Arjuna means a symbolic representation to all human beings. And the third is the matter. So here it is Trinity. So when Sankhya Darshan transforms into Sankhya Yoga, from duality it lands into the Trinity. And in Trinity we see three, though Trinity is also a mention to Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh. Here, in the realms of Sankhya Yoga, let us consider the Trinity as the Keshava, that is cosmic creator, Arjuna, the beings, and Prakriti, that is the nature. So all these three, when they mingle, the cosmic creation manifests. Under 12, let us not take it as a simple ordinary verse, because here there is a great, remarkable change which has been brought into an ancient doctrine of Sankhya Darshana. And while making a change, not only we are bringing in the third element, which is the existential one, the prerequisite for any being to exist, for any nature to exist, but at the same time, we are also making it aware for the commoners that all three exist, yet all are one. So while making a mention in the verse, in a most poetic form, the Keshava, the divine intuit, makes a mention to the dichotomy and delusion ridden Arjuna. Arjuna, there has never been a time when I was not there, you were not there, and all these kings and their armies were not there. What is the mention to the king and the armies? The other royal mention goes to the mention to the other royals is an indication towards the nature. What nature? The desires and the propensities. It's a firm belief of the ancient wisdom that devoid of the desires and devoid of the propensities, the entire creation shall cease to exist. The manifestation of the apparent world is facilitated just because of the desire and propensities. Though it is a higher science of consciousness for which right this moment is not appropriate one for me to elaborate further. But let it be known, the desire and propensities are the basic prerequisite for the entire apparent world to exist. And therefore, in an indicative form, Krishna makes a mention, there has never been a time when you were not there, there has never been a time when I was not there, the source, and there has never been a time when all these whom you see around as various desires and propensities, they weren't there. They've been there at all times. And Arjuna, let it be known to you. While making this mention, Keshava, the Gitakar Brahma Rishi Muni Ved Vyas, through Keshava, is now establishing an improvised and an amended or a rectified or a new version of the Kapil Muni's doctrine, that is Sankhya Darshana. Interestingly, let me make a mention, although I made a mention even in the earlier discourse, that interestingly, the Sankhya Darshana comes to us in the form of a Sankhya Karika. It's a compilation of 72 verses. And the most interesting part is that the second chapter of Srimad Bhagwad Gita, by the name Sankhya Yoga 2, encompasses 72 verses. It's a coincidence or something which has been doctrinated in that manner is something which I cannot embark upon. But yet, it's an interesting phenomena for the sake of observation for all seekers. Now, let verse number 12 not be begone just as a matter of reference, but as a matter of an indelible impression that should go on till the entire chapter. If at all there is a curiosity before any human being to understand the difference between the doctrine of Sankhya Darshana and Sankhya Yoga, let it be deeply understood that it is because now here it is an advent of the third force, which is the Almighty Supreme, Almighty Divine, represented here as an allegory to Keshava. We come down to the verse number 13 and the last word for today's discourse. This is the last verse for today's discourse. The verse number 13 is not an ordinary one. Here it is the twilight moment where probably we see a lot of darkness, and early morning rise when we witness the orange ball appearing right at the horizon. When you see and sight that orange ball rising above the horizon is a moment of entire spell. It casts a spell on all the neurons of your brain, and all great seekers make utilization of those important, pertinent moments. They undergo their spiritual exercises and want to absorb that orange ball in its entirety. Likewise, the verse number 13 also makes a mention to a wonderful exposition of the ancient Indian wisdom, which is rebirth. Rebirth and the karmic concept, these two fundamental pillars, are the bedrock of the ancient Indian wisdom. In case if you remove any of them, the entire castle of the ancient Indian wisdom shall fall apart like a pack of play cards. These are two foundation pillars of our entire Indian ethos. And a mention to that excellent depth has been made by a single usage of a word, and that is Dehantara Prapti. Now, Dehantara Prapti is post-death. What happens to post-death? Post-mortem. Now, what is the post-mortem here? Here, the post-mortem here is that once a person would die, there is yet another life to begin. How does he make a mention? He makes a mention to the evolutionary phase of one's human life. Any human life would always initiate with childhood. As a transitionary phase shall get into the youth, further transit onwards shall land into Praudavastha, Jara, that means old age. And what beyond old age? Is it a full stop? No, there is no full stop over here. There are no full stops in eternity. There are three dots yet to be repeated again. And here it makes a mention that Arjuna, what do you agree upon? Something which has always existed. Something which is a falling state in the evolutionary cycle of infinity and eternity. Like a passing age, a human life progresses through different phases, biologically and psychologically, and does not end there. It further progresses into a life beyond, which is a fact. Dehantara Prapti. It's not going to cease at that point. It's certainly going to have an extension. You're certainly going to initiate once again. So what do you agree of? In order to elevate the state of mind of the dichotomy-ridden, bewildered, delusion-ridden seeker, in order to create a paradigm shift within him, the Almighty, the intuitive divine input is not only making use of various other illustrations, but also at the same time placing a right footing for the Indian wisdom to exist. And further, verse number 13 is the onset. I can term it as the sunrise in Bhagwad Gita. We started with the chapter 1, that was the twilight zone. We were anticipating the sun to rise. And verse number 13 is the time where the sun rises, which its effulgence now shall be born and observed by all sincere seekers. We find the sun rising. It is there now that I make a mention. The journey here onwards is going to be more serious, interesting, yet for the sincere seekers who must understand the allegory of the script writer of Bhagwad Gita at a deeper end of their consciousness. It is not a mere mention of a poetic phrase rendered to you as verses. It is beyond. It is beyond. This was all for the day, and we shall further our journey from chapter 2, verse number 14 onwards in the next program. By then, wish you a happy traversing in your life. See you again. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.